Ivan, hi.
Hello,
Thanks for your time.
pleasure seeing you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, for your support actually of Ukraine. I know that you frequently come to Kiev, you see the situation, but you also see what's happening in the world. I saw your a lot of videos, a lot of analysis. Three quick questions concerning the 2 years of full-scale, so-called full-scale invasion, and 10 years of the hybrid war. What are the results of Ukraine, success of West in this war, and what is the biggest problem?
Listen, it's extremely important to make a distinction, and this is important because for a very long time, the West did not have Ukraine policy. Talking about Ukraine, Russia, the West has two different Russia policies. There was those who basically believed that Ukraine is the way to try basically to keep Russia calm down, or others who believed that the Ukraine is the platform to change Russia, particularly after the Orange Revolution. So you're going to start in Ukraine, you're going to end up in Moscow. What was common between these two is that there was no Ukrainian policy. You're doing this or that with the idiots that something should happen in Russia. And then came 2014. The annexation of Crimea, in a way, was an act of desperation because, of course, the scenarios for this was known from the 1990s. Basically, the Russian army has a kind of an idea how to do it, but it was not a pre-planned operation simply because what happened with Yanukovych, and particularly the fact that he didn't manage to keep the situation after the agreement, came as a major surprise on the Russian side. And then for a while, in my view, at least on the basis of what I have been studying and researching, in Moscow there was the idea that what is happening in Donbass is a very genuine popular revolution. They lived with this idea till they understand that basically this is not a majority support, that people basically not staying there, and then it changed dramatically. So here comes the problem of the West. In a certain way, there's three different wars between Russia and Ukraine. The first was this kind of a annexation and Donbass story, and here basically Russia annexed Crimea but lost Ukraine. The second was the special operation that started on February 24. President Putin, by the way, is lying quite a lot when he talks about the past, but not much when he talks about the future. So it was meant to be a special operation. It was meant basically to go for 6 to 8 weeks. And basically the idea was to end up with a pro-Russian government in Kiev. And this operation was defeated already in September 2022 with the partial mobilization in Russia. Because the most important is that you do not do mobilization if it is a special operation.
Exactly.
So this was the end. So the question was why the Russian population basically did not get angry, not because of starting the war, some people were angry, but also why basically losing the special operation. And here's the biggest success of President Putin on the propaganda front, and this is the story that he managed to convince majority of the Russian population that he's not in a war with Ukraine, but he's in the war with the West. And from this point of view, withdrawing and losing from West is one thing. And he did it. Part of it was due to the fact that for a period between 2018 and 2020, and also it got some of the COVID period, majority of the Russians were very much in an apocalyptic mood. I have been going through the data of the Levada Center, and you're going to be surprised to see that between 2018 and 2020, vast majority of Russians believe that the Third World War is going to take place in the next 5 or 10 years. So suddenly when Ukraine happened, even people were slightly relaxed. This is not the biggest war that you expected. And this is why for them, this third war started, and this third war, as I said, is very much framed as the war with the West. By the way, this is also how the non-Western countries perceive it. This is how China perceives it. This is how India perceives it. It's a proxy war. As a result of it, interestingly enough, also the President Putin reframed the major objectives of the war. Of course, they're still talking about demilitarization and denazification and so on. By the way, do you know that denazification was the word that was most searched in the Russian Yandex system in the first 2 weeks of the war, because basically the Russians could not understand what it was all about. But the very important thing is that he's not talking about victory. He's talking about a never-ending war. And if you see the State of the Union address of the Russian president, and you can see this very much during the presidential campaign, he's much more arguing that economically and socially, Russia can keep the standard of living of the population while continue fighting. So it's not about we're going to get this city or that city, but be prepared that this is the new normal. 30% of the Russian budget for the moment is spent on war-related items. The mobilization goes very much through commercial means. It's very much more through money than through the nationalistic rhetoric. And this is the reality which is not always perceived from outside. And the Russian Federation, if something dramatic is not going to happen there, probably going to have economic and financial resources to go like this for a short period of time, at least 2-3 years. Many things can change, but you cannot work with the assumptions of this change. Yeah, we can get out, absolutely.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all.
Sorry. We'll do it.
Yeah.
I will stop and we will finish.
Yeah.
And I have 2 questions last.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ivan, my second question concerning what we have to do. Yes, you described very, very thoroughly the past. Now, I have just visited the Chatham House discussion about the future of the war. Some experts say that we should be ready for the so-called temporal ceasefire. I frankly don't understand between what? Between new Cold War, between Third World War. Some European politicians like Macron and others say that they are ready even maybe to send troops to Ukraine, to support Ukraine. There is a situation in the US politics. So how all this public opinion and opinions coexist, and what will be the most probable situation in the next 6 months, or actually in this year?
Listen, when the war started, particularly Europeans were very skeptical about the capabilities of Ukraine.
It's true.
And then came the counteroffensive, and then we went on the other extreme. We decided that you're superhumans and nothing is going basically to touch, and the fact that so much infrastructure was destroyed and so on, that nothing is going to affect Ukraine. So now we're in a much more realistic position. Ukraine did incredible thing. If you basically try to go back and see the assessment of the situation in the beginning of the operations, well, the Americans were right that Russia is going to attack, but even Americans were very skeptical that Ukraine is going to have a capacity to resist.
Absolutely.
And keep in mind, one of the reasons the Americans didn't give Ukraine much more advanced technology in the beginning of the war was that they were afraid it's going to be captured by the Russians. We're in a totally different world. What is changing now, in this very moment when we are talking, is that if in the first 2 years everything was about solidarity with Ukraine, now some of the EU member states starts to see Russia policy as a direct threat to their core security interests. The Baltics, the Scandinavians, the Poles, there is a growing perception, right or wrong, to be honest, I cannot, that Russia is going to test Article 5 on some of the NATO member states. Yeah, and this is what is changing the situation, and this is why we have at the moment, when we talk about temporary ceasefire, 2 or 3 different scenarios. One is very much the Korean scenario. This, to be honest, from the very beginning, this is how I believe that the war is going to end up. You're going to have a front line, which is going to be a ceasefire. We don't know exactly where, and which is going to be stabilized. But in order for the Ukrainians to feel secure about this, it's not enough to have these abstract security guarantees. Having NATO troops in the country, in the way you have American troops in South Korea, makes a difference. The other option is if you're basically going, if the Russians are really trying much more to talk about negotiating and trading off territories, but trading off not legally. I don't see any Ukrainian government that is ever going to agree. But basically making this type of a stabilization of the front much longer. At least my view is that Ukraine can do this only if it is NATO member. So this is the West German scenario, where you're basically saying, okay, you're very much interested where the border is going to be. We are very much interested on the nature of the border. And on this story, again, you're going to have a NATO installation. You're going to have a NATO troops in Ukraine, because otherwise, after Minsk, Ukraine is traumatized that any type of a ceasefire can basically make Europeans and Americans less ready to help, while basically Russians are going to make the next step in a moment which they find better for themselves. And here is my last point. What was the biggest mistake on Minsk is not what people normally believe it was. Listen, Ukrainian army was in a very difficult position. So when Merkel made the Minsk agreement, it was also saving certain type of encircled Ukrainian troops. It was a different Ukrainian army. It was a different Ukraine. Yanukovych has left the country in a very bad place. But the West did nothing to invest in its defense capabilities. The fact that we are not basically able to produce munitions now, knowing about 2014, this is unforgivable. And also, I'm even not so much basically, people are focused on Nord Stream 2 and so on. Even this is doable because you can always stop it, but not investing in your defense capability after Russia started a war on the European territory. This is something that I really do believe that people should be critical both to the Chancellor Merkel and to President Macron and to everybody else, because this means that we continue to live with the illusion that a major war was not possible.
Ivan, my last question, more original, more geopolitical, because you are a very famous specialist in the post-socialistic Europe, I would say, in the post-Soviet period. So, what is the future of this area of the post-Soviet system? These 12 countries, which now are not in the European Union, but or in NATO, but they exist in different unions, military unions, economical unions. So what Russia is going to do, or what other countries like Kazakhstan, Georgia, Moldova can do? What is the future of this post-Soviet so-called space?
Listen, these different parts of the post-Soviet space are in a different place. For Moldova totally depends on success of Ukraine. Totally. Because if Ukraine managed to stabilize the situation and so on, Moldova basically, and when I said being integrated, this is true, and here Macron was totally right. When people talk about the enlargement of the EU, it's a wrong term. We're talking about remaking of it. Of course, you're not going to integrate neither Ukraine, nor Moldova, nor the Balkans in the way you have been integrating basically Poland or the Czech Republic
Baltic
before,
countries,
or the Baltic countries. What has happened is that now European Union is a peace project, but also a war project, and all these countries are coming with a totally different rationale. What is happening in Central Asia? I do believe that there you're going to have a different type of a dynamics where Russia and China should try to basically balance their interests. Armenia is in a very difficult position. On the other side, there is a really increased cooperation between Russia and Iran. By the way, Russian-Iranian cooperation is much more active and in a certain way can turn to be strategically more important than the Russia-China one, because Chinese are very careful, Chinese are trying to do this and that. Russia is also going to be very interested to keep some of its traditional partnership because they're losing positions in India. India, which was traditionally Russia-friendly, more than 60% of their military equipment coming from Soviet Union and Russia, but now obviously they're shifting quite a lot to the United States. And honestly speaking, Russia is not going to come stronger as a result of this war, even if they're successful to control territories and others.
Occupied territories.
They're not going to come stronger. But of course, on the other side, where what we can expect, and this is my last point, is that nobody can understand what President Putin is doing if he does not understand to what extent some demographic concerns about the shrinking of the Russian populations shape his decision, and secondly, his own age. If there is somebody who does not believe in the Russian political system, this is President Putin himself. So he'll try to fix the problems while he's still alive. And as a result of it, the major difference between China and Russia when it comes basically to reshaping the world is that China still thinks with the idea of a long time. Russia thinks with the idea of the short time. So when people fear that they're going to be provocation and so on, they have a strong argument to believe it, because Putin does not trust his successor, even if he's going to select probably the successor. Because don't forget, he already has a successor once, when Medvedev was president.
Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.